My name is David Chun, and I'm an aerospace engineer with 14 years of experience working on classified defense projects. I spent most of my career as a contractor for Lockheed Martin and later Marietta, specializing in satellite guidance systems and space-based interceptor technologies. Like millions of other people, I grew up absolutely loving Star Wars, those space battles, the Death Star, the idea of laser weapons and fighters zipping through space. I never imagined that my childhood obsession with a galaxy far, far away would lead me to discover one of the most brilliant deception operations in modern history. 8 months ago, in December 2024, I was doing routine research for a proposal on next-generation missile defense systems when I stumbled across something that completely changed how I view both Hollywood and the military-industrial complex. What I found wasn't just interesting, it was mind-blowing, because I discovered evidence that the Star Wars franchise wasn't just entertainment. It was a deliberate psychological operation designed to hide the most advanced space weapons program in human history by presenting it as science fiction. I'm sharing this story because I think people deserve to understand how reality and fiction have been deliberately blurred to conceal technologies that are far more advanced than most people realize. The line between what we think is entertainment and what's actually military development has been completely erased. And once you see the connections, you can't unsee them. It started when I was researching the history of kinetic interceptor technology for a new project proposal. I was specifically looking into something called hit-to-kill mechanics, essentially using high-velocity projectiles to destroy targets through direct collision rather than explosive warheads. As I was going through declassified documents from the Strategic Defense Initiative, I kept noticing references to projects with names that sounded strangely familiar. Brilliant Pebbles, Brilliant Eyes, Space-Based Interceptors, Autonomous Targeting Systems, Hypervelocity Kinetic Weapons. The more I read, the more I realized I was looking at technologies that were essentially identical to what we see in Star Wars, except these weren't from a movie. They were real military programs that had received billions of dollars in funding throughout the 1980s and early 90s. For those unfamiliar with SDI, it was President Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, announced in March 1983. The media mockingly called it Star Wars because the technology seemed so far-fetched. Space-based laser systems, orbital battle platforms, autonomous interceptor satellites that could track and destroy incoming missiles. Critics said it was pure science fiction, impossible with current technology. But as I dug deeper into the technical specifications, something incredible started to emerge. These weren't just conceptual weapon systems. They were detailed engineering projects with specific performance parameters, test results, and deployment timelines. And the timing of their development coincided almost perfectly with the peak popularity of the Star Wars franchise. Have you ever wondered why the Star Wars movies became such a cultural phenomenon exactly when they did? The first film was released in May 1977, just as military space technology was beginning to advance rapidly. The Empire Strikes Back came out in 1980. Return of the Jedi was released in May 1983, just 2 months after Reagan announced SDI. That's not a coincidence. What really got my engineering mind racing was when I started comparing the technical specifications of SDI weapons systems with the fictional technology depicted in Star Wars. The similarities weren't just superficial, they were exact functional matches. Take the Brilliant Pebbles program, for example. This was a real SDI project that involved deploying thousands of small, autonomous interceptor satellites in low Earth orbit. Each pebble was about the size of a watermelon, equipped with advanced sensors, autonomous guidance systems, and kinetic warheads designed to destroy targets through high-velocity collision. They could detect threats, calculate intercept trajectories, and engage targets without any external guidance, essentially functioning as independent space fighters. Now think about the TIE fighters and X-Wing fighters in Star Wars. Small, highly maneuverable spacecraft with advanced targeting systems, capable of operating independently or in coordinated swarms, designed to intercept and destroy enemy vessels through high-speed engagement. The operational concepts are virtually identical. The Brilliant Eyes program was even more striking. This was SDI's space-based sensor network, a constellation of satellites equipped with infrared and optical sensors designed to detect, track, and target ballistic missiles throughout their flight trajectory. The system could distinguish between real warheads and decoys, coordinate targeting data between multiple platforms, and provide real-time battle management for the entire defensive network. That's exactly what we see with the Death Star's targeting systems, the Rebel base sensors on Yavin, and the Imperial fleet coordination systems throughout the movies. The technical concepts are so similar that it's like Lucas had access to classified SDI design documents. As an engineer, I couldn't ignore these parallels, so I started researching the connections between Lucas and the defense establishment. What I found absolutely fascinated me. George Lucas wasn't just some independent filmmaker creating space fantasy. He had extensive connections to the military-industrial complex through Industrial Light and Magic, his special effects company. ILM didn't just work on movies, they also did contract work for defense companies, developing computer graphics and simulation systems for military training and weapons development. In the early 1980s, ILM was working on contracts with companies like Lockheed, General Dynamics, and McDonnell Douglas, the same companies that were simultaneously developing SDI technologies. They were creating sophisticated computer simulations and visual effects for both Hollywood movies and classified military projects. Think about that for a moment. The same people who created the visual effects for Star Wars space battles were also working on computer simulations for real space weapon systems. The same companies that built the Death Star models for the movies were also building prototypes for actual space-based battle platforms. But here's where it gets really interesting. I found financial records showing that several major defense contractors provided funding and technical consultation for the Star Wars movies, particularly the later films. The official explanation was that they were interested in the special effects technology for their own simulation and training programs. But when you look at the timing and the specific technologies involved, a different picture emerges. The Star Wars franchise wasn't just entertainment that happened to inspire military development. It was a deliberate effort to normalize and popularize the concept of space warfare while simultaneously hiding the real development of those exact capabilities. The more I researched, the more connections I found. Edward Teller, the physicist who was one of the main advocates for SDI, had been consulting with Hollywood on science fiction projects since the 1950s. He specifically advised on films that featured advanced space technology and directed energy weapons. Teller was also one of the key figures who convinced Reagan to pursue SDI in the first place. He gave Reagan a presentation on space-based laser systems in 1967, and that meeting was described as the first gleam in Ronald Reagan's eye of what later became the Strategic Defense Initiative. But Reagan wasn't just interested in the technology. He was fascinated by the public relations aspect. He understood that for SDI to receive congressional funding and public support, Americans needed to believe that space weapons were both technically feasible and strategically necessary. What better way to accomplish that than through the most popular science fiction franchise in history? The genius of the operation was that it worked on multiple levels simultaneously. For the general public, Star Wars was just entertainment. Exciting space battles that made advanced technology seem fun and heroic rather than threatening. For the scientific community, the movies demonstrated that space-based weapon systems were at least conceptually viable, which helped reduce skepticism about SDI proposals. For potential adversaries, particularly the Soviet Union, Star Wars served as a form of psychological warfare. The movies showcased America's technological sophistication and cultural dominance, while implying that the United States was already thinking seriously about space-based weapon systems. And for the defense contractors and military planners who were actually developing these technologies, Star Wars provided perfect cover. Any similarities between fictional weapons and real development projects could be dismissed as coincidence or as fiction inspiring reality, rather than the other way around. I started digging into the specific technical details of how this coordination worked, and what I found was absolutely brilliant from an engineering perspective. The weapon systems depicted in Star Wars weren't just similar to SDI technologies. They were deliberately designed to showcase specific capabilities that the military wanted to develop and deploy. Take the concept of autonomous space-based interceptors, for example. In the movies, we see fighters that can operate independently, make tactical decisions without ground control, and coordinate with other units to engage multiple targets simultaneously. This wasn't just cool science fiction. It was exactly what the Brilliant Pebbles program was designed to achieve. The technical challenges of autonomous space-based weapons are enormous. You need advanced sensors that can operate in the space environment, sophisticated guidance systems that can calculate intercept trajectories in three-dimensional space, and onboard computers capable of making split-second tactical decisions without human input. By showcasing these capabilities in Star Wars, Lucas was essentially providing a proof-of-concept demonstration that these technologies were achievable and strategically valuable. The movies made space warfare look not only possible but inevitable, which helped generate support for the massive funding that SDI required. But the coordination went deeper than just technical concepts. I found evidence that specific scenes in the Star Wars movies were designed to address particular military requirements and strategic concerns. The Death Star, for example, wasn't just a superweapon. It was a demonstration of how space-based platforms could project power across vast distances with precision and overwhelming force. The technical concept of focusing enormous energy through space-based systems to destroy specific targets was exactly what SDI's laser weapon programs were trying to achieve. The Rebel Alliance's successful attack on the Death Star served a different purpose entirely. It demonstrated that even the most sophisticated space-based weapon systems could be vulnerable to small, coordinated attacks using advanced fighter technology, which was precisely the kind of capability that SDI was being designed to provide to American forces. When I started looking at the broader timeline, the coordination becomes even more obvious. The original Star Wars trilogy was released between 1977 and 1983, perfectly coinciding with the initial development and public announcement of SDI. The prequel trilogy was released between 1999 and 2005, just as space-based missile defense was being revived under the Bush administration. Each wave of Star Wars movies corresponded with renewed military interest in space-based weapon systems. And each time, the movies introduced new technological concepts that aligned with whatever the Pentagon was actually trying to develop. The prequel trilogy, for example, featured much more sophisticated space battle coordination, advanced drone technology, and automated weapon systems, exactly the kind of capabilities that 21st century military space programs were beginning to incorporate. But what really convinced me that this was intentional coordination rather than coincidence was what happened to SDI funding and development after the movies. The program officially ended in 1993, supposedly because the Cold War was over and the Soviet threat had diminished. Except it didn't actually end. The technologies and research programs were simply transferred to other organizations and given different names. The Ballistic Missile Defense Organization took over most of the space-based interceptor work. The Space Development Agency continued developing autonomous satellite systems. Private contractors like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon kept refining the guidance and targeting technologies. And then, in 2019, the Trump administration established the Space Force as a separate branch of the military, with explicit responsibility for space-based weapons and defensive systems. In 2025, Trump announced something called the Golden Dome program, which sounds remarkably similar to the original SDI concept. Have you noticed how space technology that seemed impossible in the 1980s is now being deployed routinely? SpaceX lands rockets autonomously with pinpoint precision. Satellite constellations like Starlink demonstrate that we can deploy and coordinate thousands of small spacecraft simultaneously. Hypersonic weapon systems showcase the kind of speed and maneuverability that space-based interceptors would need. The technologies that were supposedly too advanced for SDI in the 1980s are now standard capabilities for private companies, which suggests that the military versions of these technologies are probably decades ahead of what we're seeing publicly. And every step of this development has been accompanied by Hollywood productions that normalize and popularize whatever capabilities are being developed. The Marvel movies showcase advanced AI systems and autonomous weapons. The recent Star Wars films feature increasingly sophisticated space battle coordination and targeting systems. When you understand this pattern, you start to see it everywhere. Top Gun movies coincide with advances in fighter aircraft technology. Marvel movies featuring artificial intelligence come out just as the military is deploying AI-powered weapon systems. Science fiction movies about genetic engineering appear alongside breakthroughs in biological warfare research. The more I researched this topic, the more I realized how sophisticated the coordination between Hollywood and the military-industrial complex has become. It's not just about hiding specific weapons programs. It's about shaping public perception of what's technologically possible and strategically necessary. When people see advanced space technology in movies, they unconsciously accept that such technology is achievable and potentially useful. When those same technologies later appear in military programs, there's less public resistance because the concepts are already familiar and normalized. This is particularly important for space-based weapons, which raise obvious concerns about arms races and treaty violations. By presenting space warfare as fictional entertainment rather than real military planning, the Pentagon can develop these capabilities without triggering the kind of public debate that would occur if people understood what was actually being built. But the most fascinating aspect of this whole operation is how it's evolved to take advantage of private space companies. SpaceX, Blue Origin, and other commercial space ventures are now developing capabilities that directly support military space programs. But they're doing it under the cover of civilian applications like internet satellites and space tourism. Elon Musk's Starlink constellation, for example, consists of thousands of small satellites with autonomous coordination capabilities and precision positioning systems. Officially, it's for providing internet access, but those same satellites could easily be equipped with kinetic interceptors or sensor packages for missile defense applications. The technical capabilities are essentially identical to what the Brilliant Pebbles program was trying to achieve in the 1980s, except now they're being deployed by private companies with minimal oversight or public awareness. When you look at the current space industry through this lens, the connections become obvious. The same companies that are launching commercial satellite constellations are also major defense contractors. The same technologies being developed for space tourism are directly applicable to military space operations. And the same Hollywood entertainment that made space technology seem exciting and beneficial is now making private space ventures seem like the natural evolution of human exploration and development. I want to be clear about something important. I'm not opposed to space technology or even military space programs. Many of these technologies have legitimate defensive applications and have led to innovations that benefit civilian society. GPS, satellite communications, and weather monitoring all emerged from military space programs. But I think people have the right to understand what's actually being developed and deployed in space, particularly when it comes to weapon systems that could affect global security and stability. The current level of secrecy and misdirection makes it impossible for the public to have informed discussions about space militarization. When I see how successfully the Star Wars operation has worked, how completely it normalized the concept of space-based weapons while hiding their actual development, I have to wonder what other technologies are being hidden in plain sight through Hollywood entertainment. Our superhero movies, with advanced AI systems, preparing us for autonomous weapons deployment, our disaster movies about climate manipulation related to weather modification programs, our alien invasion movies designed to build support for space-based surveillance and response capabilities. Once you understand how the Star Wars deception worked, you start to see similar patterns everywhere in popular culture. And you start to realize that the line between entertainment and military planning has been completely erased. The technologies that seemed impossible when Star Wars first came out are now being deployed routinely. The space battles that seemed like pure fantasy are now being planned by military strategists. The weapon systems that were supposedly science fiction are now operational reality. And the next generation of space-based capabilities is probably already being developed in classified programs, while Hollywood prepares the public for their eventual revelation and deployment. I keep thinking about how perfectly the Star Wars operation worked. It took technologies that would have seemed threatening and militaristic if presented directly, and made them seem exciting and heroic through entertainment. It generated public support for massive military spending on space programs, while making that spending seem like inevitable technological progress rather than weapons development. Most importantly, it established space warfare as a normal and acceptable concept, so that when real space weapons are eventually deployed, they'll seem like the natural evolution of technology rather than a dangerous escalation of military capabilities. The question I keep asking myself is, what current Hollywood franchises are serving the same function today? What technologies are being normalized through entertainment while being developed in classified programs? What future military capabilities are being presented as fiction while actually being engineered as reality? When you look at the massive success of Marvel movies featuring AI systems, space-based operations, and global surveillance networks, the implications become pretty clear. When you see how popular science fiction has become that features genetic engineering, weather control, and advanced robotics, you start to wonder what's actually being developed behind the scenes. The Star Wars franchise proved that you can hide the most advanced military programs in human history by presenting them as entertainment. The operation was so successful that most people still don't realize it happened, even with decades of hindsight and declassified documents. What do you think about these connections? Have you noticed other examples of Hollywood entertainment that seem suspiciously similar to current military developments? Because once you start looking for these patterns, they become impossible to ignore. The technologies that shape our future are being developed right now in classified programs funded by enormous military budgets. And if the Star Wars precedent is any guide, we're probably already seeing previews of those technologies in the movies and television shows that we think are just entertainment. The masquerade of reality continues, and most of us are still watching from the audience, thinking we're seeing fiction when we're actually being prepared for the future that's already being built above our heads, in the darkness of space, behind the bright lights of Hollywood.